Okay, so today we're going to introduce Photoshop, and I'm going to show you how to use the clone and healing tools in Photoshop to repair an image. So one thing that we have to know about Photoshop that's a little bit different than Illustrator is that we're working with pixels, and a lot of times we're going to be editing photographs or manipulating photographs, and sometimes painting in Photoshop. So when you are manipulating or editing a photograph, instead of creating a new document and placing that image into that document, you're just going to open that document directly. So I'm going to hit open, and I'm going to find my file that I'm looking for, and then I'm going to open that directly into Photoshop. So I'm going to hit open here, and what you're going to see is we've got our canvas, but basically it's just our image that's showing up. Okay, so this is the image that I'm working with. And like I said before, our images are all made up of pixels. So if I were to zoom in really close, what I'm going to actually see is all these little squares that make up the image, and those are your pixels. This image isn't particularly high resolution, which is okay for what we're doing here. But if you were going to want to print something out or something like that, you would want to have a higher resolution image to work with. Higher resolution images are always easier to work with just because you're working with more pixels, which gives you more options. So right now I'm just going to talk about the workspace. It's set up similar to your workspace in Illustrator. You do have the option to kind of choose your workspace over here. You've got your toolbar on the left, all your panels on the right. And just like in Illustrator, if you go to Window, you're going to see any of the panels that you don't see on the right-hand side. Now, there's two panels that we're going to be working with a lot in Photoshop. The first one is going to be your layers panel. So you're always going to want to have your layers panel available to you because it's important to be able to see what's going on in that layer. The other panel that you're going to use quite a lot is your properties panel. So your properties panel changes depending on what you have selected. You'll notice that I have the layer of my background image selected. I know it's selected because it's highlighted in blue. Yours might just be a lighter color gray or something else. And when I have that selected down here in my properties panel, you can see that it tells me the width and the height and also the resolution of that particular image that I have selected. Depending on what we have selected, we can make changes in our properties panel. Right now, I'm not able to make any changes, but it is giving me that information. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to just talk about the cloning tools today. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of this particular image. And the reason I want to do that is because I want this image to stay intact the way it is. There's two ways to work in Photoshop. One of them is called destructive, and one of them is called non-destructive. When you work destructively, you're actually manipulating the actual pixels. And when we work non-destructively, we're making changes in a way that we can easily go back and change them again. So when I make a duplication of this particular layer, that means that I have kind of a little backup of that particular layer that I can always go back to if I were to accidentally make destructive changes that then kind of inhibit my end result. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to unlock this layer, and I'm going to do that by just clicking on that padlock symbol that is at the end of the layer there. And then there's a number of ways to duplicate a layer, and I'm going to show you all of them, and you really just need to remember one. So one way that you can do that is you can drag this down to the new symbol at the bottom of the layers panel, and that will duplicate your layer. You can go up to the fly down menu, you can go down to where it says duplicate layer. You can go up to layer on your menu bar and go down to where it says duplicate layer. You can right click and duplicate the layer. You can hit Command J, which is my favorite because I really like using the key commands. And as long as your layer is unlocked, you can also hold down the Option or Alt key and drag it, and that will also make a copy of that layer. Now, I made a bunch of copies just to show you all the different ways to make copies. However, we only need 2 copies of this. So I'm going to select both of these layers by holding down Shift and clicking on both of them. And then I'm going to click on this trash can, and that's just going to delete those layers because I don't need them. Now you'll notice that when I unlocked my layer, it changed the name of the layer from background to layer 0. So it's really important to label our layers, especially, in this particular project, we're only going to be doing about 3 layers, but in other projects, you're going to be having multiple layers, and it's really important to know what's what. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just double click on top of the text of the layer, and I'm going to call this my original image. And I want to know which one is my original. And then I'm going to put here, and I'm just going to name this one Rosie because that's her name. And then for this original image, because I don't want to make any changes to it, I just want to have it as like a backup. I'm going to select it, and I'm going to click on that padlock again. And what that's going to do is it's going to lock that layer, and then I'm going to hide it. So you see this little eyeball here. Basically that allows you to hide your layer. So you can actually hide all of your layers. You're going to see this checker box pattern, which is basically showing that things are transparent. So I'm going to make that Rosie layer visible again. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to create a new layer. This new layer is going to be the layer that we're going to be working on to heal this image. So I'm going to click on that. And that one I'm going to double click again, and I'm going to call this healing or working, whatever makes more sense to you. And so I also can, because I want to just be working on this healing layer, I can take this layer and I can lock that as well. I might need to unlock it later, but you can either click on the lock symbol to unlock it, or you can re-click on that padlock up above and unlock it. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the healing tools. So there's a couple of different ones. I'm only going to show you today the healing brush, the spot healing brush, and the clone tool. And those 3 tools should be enough to kind of be able to get you through refining Rosie and getting her back to the way she was originally. So the first tool that I'm going to start with is going to be the spot healing brush tool. What you're going to see, I'm actually going to, you're going to see that there are a couple of tools here. The spot healing brush, it's supposed to look like a Band-Aid, and it has a little like dotted line that is supposed to be like a little circle, a half circle. And that's how you can tell the difference between the spot healing brush and the healing brush tool. It's important to know the difference because they do different things. So we're going to take the spot healing brush, and you can see that my brush is massive right now. So there's a couple ways. This is a brush dependent tool, which means that you can use lots of different brush sizes or brush shapes to use this tool. And so there's a couple of different ways to change my brush size. The first way is up here on your control bar. If you don't see that, you can go up here and go to where it says options and click on that. And that will give us that control bar up at the top. And what this does is basically, depending on which tool you have selected, it will give you different information and different settings that you can change. It's kind of like a shortcut, which is kind of nice. So you can click on that, and you can adjust the size of your brush here. And in the newer versions, you're going to get that little slider actually when you're just hovering underneath of the brush. So I can adjust my brush size there, or I like to use the key commands, which is next to the letter P, there's 2 brackets. The one on the left makes your brush smaller, and the one on the right makes it larger. So I'm just going to make that brush smaller. Anytime you're working with any of the healing tools, it really is helpful to work small. The smaller you work, the less kind of destructive you're going to get with the content around what you're working with, and it's going to look more realistic and cleaner. All right, so again, I'm going to go back over to my layers panel, make sure that I am on that healing. And I'm actually going to just go into my fly down menu and go down to where it says panel options. What I want to do here is I actually want to make my thumbnails a little bit larger so I can see what's going on there. So I'm going to hit OK. And now you can see that the thumbnails get really big. Now this could be a little bit cumbersome if you're working with a lot of layers, but being that we're working only with 3 layers, this makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on. So I'm going to make sure that my healing layer is selected, because whatever layer you have selected is the layer that you're going to work with here. Now, if I had Rosy selected, because it's a locked layer, it'll actually give me this like no symbol telling me that I can't actually make any changes to that layer. So I'm going to go back to my healing layer. And basically what this brush is a content aware brush. Okay. So what that means is that if I start painting with this brush, it will take the content around it, so the pixels that are around the area that I'm painting, and help to use them to fill in the area that I'm painting. So the first thing, because we're working with multiple layers here, up at the top, you're going to see a little box that says sample all layers. Now this is unchecked. When I do this, it's not actually going to do anything, because right now we're on a layer that doesn't have any information on it. So if it's not sampling the rest of the layers, it's not going to make any changes. So I need to sample all layers, and then as I paint over this line, what's going to happen is it's going to basically disappear. And what's happening here is that the healing brush tool is taking the pixels around, kind of filling in that information so that it looks right. Now, the thing about this is that truly it is only for spots. So when they say spot healing, they mean spot healing. Okay, so this is really a brush that is better for little tiny small things. And if you're trying to work with larger areas like this, it's not going to work. So if I start going like that, you're going to see there's all sorts of mistakes that happen. Now, just like in the other Adobe programs, if you hit Command Z, that's going to undo and take you back one step. But the important part is to remember, in Photoshop, you have a limited number of times that you can go backwards. So that's one of the reasons why it's so important to work non-destructively in this program. All right. So that spot healing brush tool, basically, we don't have to do much to do it. And it's really good for refining or kind of smoothing away things. Now, for this particular image, I don't want to smooth things out too much because I don't want the picture to look unnatural. So for right now, that's pretty much all I want to use that healing brush for. Like maybe a little bit up here. But there's actually tools that are going to be better suited to this particular part of the image. So that's going to move us on to the healing brush tool. Now, the difference between the spot healing and the healing brush is that with the healing brush tool, you get to actually choose where the pixels are coming from. So with the spot healing, it's self-aware, which means that it's only going to choose from pixels that are around where you're painting. This one, you get to choose the pixels from anywhere in the document, and you're using those pixels to paint. Now, here's the thing is that with the healing brush, you're not taking those pixels and copying them exactly to the area that you're painting. You're taking those pixels and combining them with the pixels that you're painting over. Okay, so this is not cloning it, it's not copying it, it's just combining the two together. So again, you want to look for things that maybe don't have a lot of variation in color. So these folds here in this particular image, they're small. They are going to be similar color to like the image around it. This area here, which actually looks like it's like a crack in the photograph, the white area is going to mess up anything that you try to do with the healing brush. So this again is not the appropriate tool for this part, but it is for something like this, maybe this up here, maybe even this, but you're probably better off with another tool, but this definitely. So realize that the reason that there are so many different healing tools is because they all kind of have their own application and they can be used along with each other. So in order for me to choose the pixels, so right now if I were to paint, it would say option click to define a source point to be used to repair the image. So what that means is that you have to hold down the option key and click to choose where your source point is, okay? Otherwise, it doesn't know where to take the pixels from. The other thing that we have to change is notice that, again, we're still working with multiple layers. So up here at the top, there's all the different settings for this particular tool. And one of them says sample, and then it says current layer. Whoops. We want to click on that drop down and choose all layers or current and below. And that will allow us to take pixels from the rosy image down here. So I'm going to hold down my option key, and when I do that, option or alt, you're going to see this target symbol. That target symbol means that I'm going to click somewhere, and that's going to be where my source is. So just to be clear, I'm just clicking one time, and my source now is going to start right here. And if I move my brush over a little bit and I click, and I start painting, you're going to see this plus sign, and see how my plus sign is like moving with my brush. That plus sign basically is your source, and your source is going to move along with your brush as you move it. Now, this is good because it just means that I have to know where my brush is or my source is at all times. But it also means that I probably want to reset my source a number of times kind of as I'm painting through. So like every time I hit the option key and kind of click again, it's resetting my source so that I can take pixels from a different area. Okay, so this takes a little bit of getting used to because it can be kind of confusing at first. So I'm going to reset my source here, and then I'm going to adjust this. Okay, I want to reset my source directly on that line so I can go straight above it. And I want to make sure that I'm not missing this variation from this kind of like frame out here to the actual like inner part of the picture. All right, so that's the healing brush. Now this can be kind of, whoops, so you'll notice that I actually ended up, my source is up here, and I'm going down here and that making changes down there. So I have to also be aware of where my source is at all times. And remember, if your source is in the wrong place and you're getting the wrong thing, all you have to do, like let's say I start doing this, and my source is all the way up here, that's not going to be what I want. So I can just hit Command Z and take a step back, and it'll get rid of that. The other reason that we are, well, I'll talk about that later. So let's look at the next tool that I'm going to introduce, and that is the clone stamp tool. So if you, this clone stamp tool looks like, it's supposed to look like an old school rubber stamp. It kind of looks more like a piece from the game Sorry. But it's going to be over here underneath of the healing brush tool. And again, my brush is massive. So again, we have to check these settings up here. Sample, current layer. We want to change that to either current and below or all layers. Again, make sure that I'm working on this healing layer. And this, just like the healing brush tool, this is a brush dependent tool, but it also is you get to choose where your pixels come from. So this tool, however, instead of combining the pixels that you've chosen and the pixels that you're painting over, it's going to completely replace them. So this is actually cloning the pixels that you choose. So I'm going to start right here, and I'm going to hold down the option key. I'm going to get that target again, very similar to the healing brush. So again, you have to make sure that you know which tool you're on. And I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger. It's showing up. And I'm going to start to kind of like cover this. Now, I want everybody to take a notice that you can actually see the edges of my brush here. And that becomes problematic, but that's a brush setting. So I'm going to go up here to my brush settings, and I'm going to show you this hardness. And the hardness determines like how hard the edge is. So when I paint something with a hard edge, so let's say I take a sample from Rosie's hair and I paint it. See, notice how the edges of my brush are actually very crisp and hard. So now if I bring my hardness down to 3% or 0% and I do the same thing, what I'm going to get is a very soft edge. So it makes more sense for us to use the hardness down at 0 or at least half of 50% when we're working on something like this, because we want it to blend together. We don't want people to know that we've modified this image. So I'm gonna start that again, where I'm gonna choose my pixels here, and you can see that like when you have selected, it actually shows you kind of that what it looks like, and I can see that plus sign again. Now see, this is where things get like a little hairy, because I can still see that variation kind of in my in the, oops, I deselected my layer. When I can see the variation from where I kind of drew over that. And so I can come back in here either with the clone stamp or with the healing brush. Now the thing is I probably want to go in with the healing brush a little bit because what I don't want is to see like the repetitiveness of like there's a slight texture here, and if I start going in with a clone stamp and repeating things over and over again, it's going to, I'm going to be able to see that pattern, and it's going to throw me off a little bit. So I'm going to go back to the clone stamp, and I'm going to try choosing her hair a little bit. I can kind of choose that line and just go in a little bit. Now, I probably should have done it from the bottom, so I'm going to try that again. I'm going to select this area. I'm going to go up, and then maybe I want to choose from here. And now my brush is really large because I have it a little bit bigger to just so that you guys can see it. And I'm going to take this and kind of just fix that line a little bit. So again, like I said, you're going to want to work kind of small so that you can't see the changes that are being made in the image. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple other things with the clone tool. First of all, the hardness works for all three of those tools that we just talked about. Also remember that you have to choose all layers. Another thing that I'm going to show you is the alignment of the sample versus the actual tool. So what that means is remember that I'm going to just sample Rosie's eye here, and remember that basically like as I draw, you can see that plus sign kind of like moving around her eye, and it's basically cloning the entire image. Now, if I start again, it's going to keep on with that image wherever I left off. However, if I were to choose aligned and I choose Rosie's eye, every time I start, it's going to start with Rosie's eye, which allows me to repeat something over and over and over again and put it all over. Okay. Now, so far we've talked about, hitting Command Z to back ourselves up. Now I've made a big mess of this image, and I'm just going to hide the actual Rosie layer. So all the things that we've done so far have landed on that healing layer. And the reason that we're doing this is because let's say I do mess up something like this and I have all these eyeballs. I can take my eraser tool, which is this little rectangle that's kind of half colored white and half black, and I can actually erase the things that I've created on this layer. And so again, the eraser is a brush dependent tool, so we can make it larger or smaller. So if there's just like a little area that you want to erase, you can do that. And so I can erase any of these sections, and then once I turn this layer back on, you'll see that they're gone. Okay. And so that's one way to kind of get rid of anything that you may have messed up or something that you feel like you need to do again. Okay. So that's the eraser tool. Now I'm going to go back to the clone stamp tool. I'm going to show you a few other things. I'm actually going to just go back so that I have Rosie back to where she was without all these eyeballs and stuff. Okay. So I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to go down to where it says Clone Source. And this is a panel that allows us to work with the clone tool. And what's really cool about this is that now this is not really relevant for this particular project again, but basically they've got these like settings, presets for the clone tool. So you know how we set our own source. This allows us to save those sources. So kind of like a radio station in the car where you get to set all your favorite channels. Here you're just setting all of your favorite sources. So let's say my first source is Rosie's eye. Then I'm going to click on my second source. I'm going to hold down that option key and I'm going to click on Rosie's nose. Then I'm going to go to my next source and I'm going to hit the option key and click on the Rosie's earring. And so now when I go back to the first one, it's her eye. The second one is her nose, though you can't see it very well. And then the third one is her earring. And so basically, these can stay for the rest of the time that you're using this particular tool in this particular document, and it will save it for you, which is kind of really nice. It's better if you're doing something like in grass where you need to, fill in from lots of different places or something like that. So there is an application for this that just doesn't happen to be relevant for this particular project. The other thing that's really cool is that you can flip your selection. So let's say I wanted to flip it horizontally. You'll notice that before I was working with her left earring that I had selected, and now it looks like it's her right earring because it's reflected over it's reflected horizontally. If I wanted to, I could also reflect it vertically. And now you can see that it is flipped vertically. And so I just also have to remember to uncheck those boxes. So you're basically just clicking on those little icons, and then you have to unclick them in order for it to go back to its normal state. The other thing that you can do is you can make something large. So I'm going to go back to Rosie's eye. You can make it larger or smaller. So I can say I want it at 200% and Rosie's eye will be large. Or I can say, you know what, I want it at 50% and it's actually going to have a smaller face of her. So if you were kind of duplicating trees or something like that and you wanted them to appear further away, you could make them smaller. Or if you wanted them to appear closer, you could make them larger. So you're able to adjust the scale. You're also able to adjust the rotation. So a kind of great application for this is when you're working with Rosie's hair. For instance, if I am going to kind of select this area, I might want it to be like a little bit adjusted. And what's nice about this is that I can actually put my cursor in there, bring my tool back to where I wanted it, and I can, with my arrow key, kind of go up and down, and you can see it shifting because it's giving you that preview. You can also go into the negatives and it'll go in the other direction. Now this is really subtle, so if I actually hit the shift key and the arrow key, it's going to go a little bit faster. All right, so if I wanted to kind of do the hair, I could kind of tilt it a little bit forward so that it fits into that curve that's kind of going up. All right, so some of you may have realized already that one of a great application for this is to be able to adjust this horizontally, because we've got this big hole here and we've got this solid shoulder over here. So if I select this area and I could put it over here, but I would have to flip that horizontally. So I could kind of find where Rosie's shoulder is going to meet her. And oh, I still have to, I had the angle on still, so that's no good. So I'm going to just back up there. And again, I'm going to just kind of find where they meet, and I'm going to drag that down. And again, I don't want to work too big, because what's going to happen is going to start to copy part of her shirt and cover up the area of Rosie on this side that's actually good. And we don't need that to happen, because we don't want things to look exactly the same on both sides, because our eyes are able to pick up on repetition and things that look the same. And so if we do that, what's going to happen is it's going to look awkward and not feel like it's the original image. There's going to be too much repetition in the image, and it's going to be distracting. All right, so basically those are all the things that you need in order to heal this image. There are a few other tools that can be used for healing and kind of making things go away, but we'll talk about those in another time. So I'd like everybody to try this, and I hope that it's helpful to get this image back to its original.